I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. The member for Greenlaw in response.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for his update to the House on the Government's response to the Aviation Safety Regulation Review report. The last ministerial statement on aviation safety was, of course, a year ago tomorrow. And at that stage, the Deputy Prime Minister outlined the Government's response to the regulatory review, led by David Forsyth, and the 37 recommendations that they made. At the time of the initial announcement of the review in November 2013 and the release of the review report in June 2014 and the last parliamentary statement in December last year, I acknowledged that aviation safety should be subject to continuous review. Aviation safety is an issue that has not been the subject of partisan debate in this parliament, nor should it be. And I've taken the same constructive relationship to these issues that the now Minister took when he was the Shadow Minister as well. We all have an interest in aviation safety, both in terms of from an economic point of view because of the importance of aviation to our national economy, but of course primarily because we're concerned about the safety of all those who fly, who work in aviation, but also of course those people who travel in aviation as well. And it's important to recognise that it is quite rightly, I think, a source of great national pride that Australia's aviation safety record is second to none anywhere in the world. And we need to make sure that that continues to be the case in the future. Last December, Labor welcomed the new CASA board appointments, and in particular the appointment of Air Vice Marshal Mark Skidmore as the Director of Aviation Safety. I took the opportunity then to express my view that CASA as a regulator should be firm but fair. That tension was better than harmony for its own sake, and this was in response to a focus in the Forsyth report that sought to foster closer relations between the regulator and the regulated. I said then, and I agree and reconfirm now, that we should never sacrifice rigour for harmony. I also referred to my concern that the request for $12 million in savings to the aviation industry from the removal of so-called red tape should not sacrifice the core mission of our aviation regulators, and these issues remain of concern to me. The opposition welcomes the government's update to the parliament, and I note that a full new board for CASA, although 3 of the 4 appointments were announced in last year's statement. The new chairman, Jeff Boyd, took over from Dr Alan Hawke in May, having served as vice chairman, and I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the work that Dr Hawke did, not just in this position, but I think his record of public service is quite extraordinary and almost without peer if you look at the decades in which he has served governments and his nation, and I pay tribute to him. I do note also the appointment of Chris Manning as an additional ATSB Commissioner in March. In September, CASA's new leadership outlined the 10 points of its regulatory philosophy. I acknowledge Mark Skidmore's organisational leadership in setting clear expectations around its regulatory approach and how it will interact with the aviation community. I think being so clear about the philosophy moving forward allows people in the industry to have an element of certainty as to how CASA will respond to certain situations, and that can only be a good thing. The aviation sector, particularly the smaller sector, general aviation, is under real pressure. And in terms of improving outcomes for them and the success of what can be, in many cases, very small business operations is obviously critical, and it's harder for smaller operators to deal with regulation than obviously the larger companies such as Qantas and Virgin Australia. Inviting the industry to point out existing issues in regulation that could be addressed shouldn't supplant the fundamental responsibility of CASA to drive continuous improvement in aviation safety. There is one matter on which the opposition has had to take a view in the past year, although not at our instigation. A disallowance motion in the Senate relating to responsibility for maintenance operations on aircraft was moved. And though the opposition favoured the precautionary approach then, I do want to indicate that I respect the assistance that Mr Skidmore and his team provided to the Parliament at that time. It is difficult for non-expert politicians to weigh highly technical aviation regulatory matters, the subject of some disagreement from time to time, although we must. While there are no specific announcements in this statement, the update is indeed welcome. Events overseas in the past year remind us that safety can never be taken for granted, and that in our dynamic world, the quest for aviation safety is never accomplished.